Name me one Fire Emblem character with an eye patch that isn't cool. Trust me, you can't. Har, Saber, Basilio, Malice, all are certified badasses. Dimitri equally pulls off the look incredibly well, but there is one peculiar thing about his eye patch compared to the others. He gets his during the course of the game. As I'm sure you know, seeing as you clicked on this video, Dimitri during the Academy phase of Three Houses has both eyes functioning just fine. When we have our long-awaited reunion 5 years later, he suddenly has his right eye covered. And believe it or not, the reason why is actually never explained. There is no canonical answer as to what happened to his eye, but there are little breadcrumbs that have allowed me to present you with some compelling theories. Let's get to the bottom of this. Like every good research should, we're gonna start with the facts. As I mentioned in my introduction, Dimitri's eye patch isn't present while he's a student at Garrick Mach and makes its first appearance in Reunion at Dawn a full 5 years later. Not once during the Academy phase does Dimitri make any sort of comment to suggest he has trouble seeing or something pre-existing is up with his eyes, making it very unlikely that it's some biological defect. In fact, the most clear piece of evidence we have for that is that his eye patch, to my own surprise when I realized this, is not consistent. In Azure Moon, Verdant Wind and Silver Snow, Dimitri has his familiar edgy accessory covering his eye, but in Crimson Flower he keeps both of his eyes for the entirety of the game. Man, this had my mind blown when I first played Crimson Flower, which was my third playthrough of the game. Anyway, that is obviously super important, because it means that whatever happens to his eye doesn't happen if Byleth sides with Edelgard. As such, we can rule out a ton of potential options, like anything genetic for example, or it being voluntary, with a perfectly healthy eye underneath. Because yeah, little sidebar, a paralogue if you will, but the reason pirates wore eye patches is because it made their eye immediately adjust to the darkness of the spaces below deck, so putting an eye patch on when your eye is just fine isn't completely unheard of. The more you know. Most importantly, this tells us the issue with Dimitri's right eye is story relevant. If he just tripped and fell with his eye on a rake or something, they'd put it in every route, but that isn't the case. Another piece of important information is that in Three Hopes, Dimitri never gets an eye patch in any of the 3 routes. Now, that can mean two things. Either the presence of Shes and not Byleth alters the timeline so much that whatever event leads to Dimitri losing his eye is avoided, or Dimitri loses his eye in the last 2 years of the time skip. After all, Three Hopes is mostly set 3 years after the Academy phase, meaning there are still 2 years unaccounted for. If the latter is the case though, then the video would end right here, because we simply know very little of when the events of the time skip exactly transpired, and would never be able to figure out what event led to the eye patch, so I choose to believe it's Byleth that's the key factor here, and fortunately there is strong evidence to suggest that is indeed the truth. For example, one key difference between Three Houses and Hopes is that Dimitri never goes fully insane. He's troubled by his past and the tragedy of Duscur haunts him every day in both games, but Three Hopes Dimitri never goes full bore mode, as Felix would put it. The same can be said for Crimson Flower Dimitri. He's far from a perfect person, but he's not remotely as bewildered and driven by personal revenge as his counterparts from other routes. This has spiraled into a theory that was relatively popular when the game first came out, being that Dimitri gouged out his own eye to no longer have to see the images that haunt him. Yeah, it's incredibly dark, and it's honestly extremely sad that this sounds believable enough to actually be true. It wouldn't be out of character, that's for sure, and when you know the state he's in when Byleth first finds him in Azure Moon, you can definitely see this being a person that would harm himself to that extent. But as harrowingly beautiful as I find it, it's most likely not true. After he has somewhat regained himself and picked the leadership of the Blue Lions back up, Dimitri is again available for the little side activities around the monastery, which include a tea party. And if observed afterwards, he'll say the following line.
My right eye? The scar is healed now. It narrows my sight a little, but it does not interfere with fighting.
This is important information, because it tells us the eye is actually still there, it's merely wounded instead of full on gone. And that makes a self-inflicted injury much less likely in my opinion. In the state Dimitri is in, which I fortunately haven't been close to and I hope the same applies to you, I can't imagine you taking half measures. Our eyes are also extremely vulnerable, they injure very quickly, so in order to merely wound yourself, you'd have to do something relatively minor, which just doesn't feel right for Dimitri to be doing. If he'd snapped and stabbed himself in the eye with his lance, sure, fine, that's believable. But inflicting a mere wound, a healed one even, doesn't feel like him. So we're taking friendly fire off the table, and return to the drawing board once more, reshifting our focus to another effect of Blaiddyd's decisions. After all, their decision to side with Edelgard has a butterfly effect connection with Dimitri's eye, so there has to be something there. As such, the answer may very well be found in the one outlier that is Crimson Flower, ironically enough. And yeah, there's definitely some evidence that supports this. So, after Blaiddyd joins Edelgard on a mission, she feels significantly strengthened to the point she refuses further help from those who sliver in the dark, and as the story progresses, even takes the fight to them. In all other routes, she instead remains allies with the Sliverers, seeking out their help in order to achieve her goals. And that decision affects the situation of an important figure within Fargus, being Cornelia, aka Cleobulus. In most routes, she is given the support or order from her superiors at those who slither in the dark to assassinate Rufus, Dimitri's uncle, and frame the prince for his death. This causes him to become exiled and leads to him going full bore, as explained earlier. The only timelines where this doesn't happen is in Crimson Flower, due to Edelgard cutting ties with the Sliverers, and Three Houses, because Dimitri returns to Fargus when the presence of the Sliverers at the monastery is revealed. This allows him and the rest of the Blue Lions to defeat Cornelia before her plan can even be completed. So I'd say the evidence is pointing pretty significantly at one person in particular. Cornelia. She has the motive, seeing as she wants Dimitri dead and broken. She has the opportunity, being in charge of the region and having Dimitri captured with ample opportunity for severe torture, and I'd say she definitely had the means as well. But we must remain open-minded. Is there any evidence that could get her off the hook? Well, yes and no. There is nothing that gets her off the hook full stop. But, just like the friendly fire angle, questions can be raised about why she would leave a wound instead of removing the eye outright. In fact, there's even battle dialogue in Three Houses that has Cornelia expressing she wished she had torn Dimitri's eyes out when she had him captured, which does eventually happen briefly under different circumstances in Three Houses as well, by the way. This line, combined with how ruthless, tyrannous and heartless she appears to be, leaves some significant doubt on whether she'd stop at a mere wound. Just like with Dimitri himself, it feels like an all or nothing scenario, and since what happened is neither, I'm unwilling to say with 100% certainty Cornelia is the person that injured Dimitri's eye. However, what does feel very likely is that she's at least responsible for it happening, due to the extremely dangerous situation she created for Dimitri. For years, all he did was fight. If it wasn't bandits or Cornelia's soldiers, it was the Imperials we find him with during the big reunion. It's not unthinkable one of them got a hit in. And while this theory is definitely a bit more broad and vague, it actually has the strongest piece of evidence behind it. The words of Toshiyuki Kusakihara, the director of Three Houses. He explains in an interview with Nintendo Dream that Dimitri's post-time skip design didn't initially have an eye patch, and it was his suggestion to add one. He wanted every post-time skip look to represent what the character went through during those 5 years, making the eye patch a symbol of the painful experiences Dimitri had to go through. That's why he doesn't wear one in Crimson Flower and Three Houses. His experiences in those routes, thanks to the absence of Cornelia, weren't so painful. Now, this is a very definitive answer, of course, coming right from the man who actually made the decision, but it is also a meta answer. It explains from a creator's perspective why Dimitri has an eye patch, but not from an in-universe one. But the question was straight up, why does Dimitri have an eye patch, suggesting to me that there may not actually be a culprit outright. If there was, why not just say, oh yeah, Cornelia did that? The fact the answer dives into design decisions to me suggests there is no definitive culprit. The answer is that Dimitri's eye got wounded during the events of his framing and exile. How, or by who, we don't know, and possibly even the game's director doesn't know. But that doesn't mean we can speculate. So who do you think is responsible? Was it Cornelia with her own hands? Some random opponent that grazed him? Friendly fire, or do you have another theory altogether? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this little investigation, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.